In the vast Pacific skies of World War II, one aircraft emerged as the ultimate predator, the F6F Hellcat. Designed with a single mission in mind, to defeat the feared Japanese Zero, it became the warhorse of the U.S. Navy. Tough, powerful, and deadly, the Hellcat gave young pilots the edge they needed to dominate the air war. This is the story of the fighter Japan simply could not stop. When Japan's Zero fighter first appeared in 1940, it shocked the world. Fast, agile, and lethal, it tore through Allied aircraft across the Pacific. America needed a counterpunch, and Grumman answered. Building upon the lessons of the rugged Wildcat, engineers designed the F6F Hellcat as a direct response to the Zero's dominance. Bigger, faster, and tougher, it was powered by the mighty Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, delivering more than 2,000 horsepower. Unlike the Zero, which sacrificed protection for agility, the Hellcat carried armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns. It was not just a dogfighter, but a weapon designed for survival. The Hellcat could dive faster, climb harder, and absorb punishment that would doom lighter aircraft. Pilots soon nicknamed it the aluminum tank. Crucially, the Hellcat was also built with carrier warfare in mind. Its wide landing gear gave stability on deck, while its forgiving handling made it easier for inexperienced pilots to fly. The Navy wanted an aircraft not only capable of beating the Zero, but also one that rookies could take into battle with confidence. When it finally took to the skies in 1942, the Hellcat marked a turning point. The hunter had arrived. The Hellcat's combat debut came in 1943, and from the very start, it changed the air war. Where earlier Allied fighters had been outclassed, the Hellcat proved superior. In engagements across the Solomon Islands and Central Pacific, American pilots quickly discovered they finally had an edge. The rugged fighter could withstand hits that would down a Zero, while its firepower shredded enemy aircraft in seconds. Its greatest test arrived in June 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, a clash remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft rose to challenge the U.S. carrier fleet, and the Hellcats tore them apart. Outnumbered but not outgunned, Navy pilots claimed more than 300 kills in a single day, most by the F6F. The scale of destruction was staggering. Japan's veteran aviators were wiped out, leaving their air force crippled. Beyond dogfights, the Hellcat proved versatile. It carried bombs and rockets for ground attack, strafed enemy airfields, and provided critical cover for Marines storming Pacific beaches. Pilots often remarked how forgiving the aircraft was, able to bring them home even with severe damage. By the end of 1944, the Hellcat was the undisputed king of the Pacific skies. The Hellcat was more than a fighter. It was the backbone of the U.S. Navy's carrier strategy. Aboard the powerful Essex-class carriers, swarms of Hellcats became the shield and sword of the fleet. Every day, the steel decks thundered with launches and recoveries, pilots climbing into cockpits for missions ranging from patrols to strikes deep into enemy territory. Life aboard was relentless. Pilots often flew multiple sorties a day, some lasting hours over endless ocean. Fatigue was constant, but the Hellcat's dependability gave them confidence. Unlike temperamental aircraft, the F6F rarely failed. Its wide stance made deck landings smoother, while its resilience forgave pilot mistakes. Rookie aviators, fresh from training, found it manageable, a lifesaver in the chaos of war. The carrier groups themselves became floating cities of war. From the Pacific's central waters to the Philippine campaign, they projected overwhelming power. Hellcats formed the protective screen against kamikazes, intercepting attackers before they reached the ships. On offensive missions, they unleashed destruction on Japanese bases, striking with bombs, rockets, and strafing runs. Pilots built a bond not only with each other but with their aircraft. They knew the Hellcat could take them into danger and, more often than not, bring them home again. Day after day, They launched into history, the roar of engines echoing across the Pacific. In March 1945, Don McPherson's war truly began. Flying with Fighter Squadron 83 off the USS Essex, his first missions carried him straight into the teeth of Japanese defenses. On March 19th, during one of his earliest sorties, he came dangerously close to death. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, exploding so close he could feel the shock waves. At any moment, his Hellcat could have been torn apart, but somehow he survived. His logbook recorded the chaos in sparse entries, but each line carried the weight of life and death. The missions varied. On one day, McPherson flew protective patrols over the crippled USS Franklin, a carrier badly damaged by kamikaze attacks. On another, he carried out a message drop, diving through dangerous skies to deliver critical communications. With each flight, his experience grew. The routine of combat, briefings, takeoffs, missions, landings etched itself into his daily life. The danger never diminished, but his confidence began to grow. The Hellcat itself became his constant companion. Pilots trusted it to withstand punishment that would doom lighter aircraft. McPherson came to see the F6F as more than a machine. It was a partner in survival, an aluminum tank that would protect him if he did his job right. By late March, the pattern of small strikes and patrols gave way to larger missions. The invasion of Okinawa was approaching, and McPherson's squadron would soon be called upon to unleash the full might of their Hellcats against one of Japan's last strongholds. For Don, the time of preparation was ending. The moment of reckoning was coming. His logbook hinted at it, but the reality would prove far more brutal than anything he had yet faced. On April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, the invasion of Okinawa began. For Don McPherson and Fighter Squadron 83, the Hellcats became blunt instruments of destruction. Loaded with napalm, rockets, and bombs, they launched from the Essex to burn, smash, and crater Japanese defenses. That morning, napalm firestorms scorched the beaches. The Marines called it Love Day, but to those on the receiving end, it was an inferno. The Hellcats hammered airfields across the island. Japanese forces had pulled back into the interior, leaving booby traps and hidden defenses behind. Working alongside tiny observation planes, McPherson's squadron was guided to suspicious targets: huts that concealed ammunition, haystacks hiding fuel, or camouflaged gun emplacements. A rocket or strafing run would reveal the truth in spectacular fashion, eruptions that sent smoke and flames billowing skyward. Flying close air support was as dangerous as it was necessary. The mountainous terrain demanded sudden climbs and sharp dives. Pilots skimmed treetops, strafing enemy positions, always under threat of ground fire. One mistake could send a Hellcat slamming into a ridge. Yet the work was vital. Every run reduced the defenses American soldiers would face once they came ashore. The fleet offshore provided constant bombardment, but it was the Hellcats that delivered precision strikes. For days, they pounded airfields, supply lines, and entrenched positions. McPherson described missions where explosions shook the earth like the 4th of July, each blast crippling Japan's ability to respond. The invasion of Okinawa became one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. Without relentless air support, the cost would have been unimaginable. For McPherson and his fellow aviators, Okinawa was more than another mission. It was the crucible where their courage and their aircraft proved indispensable. March 23, 1945, marked a turning point for Don McPherson. Returning from a strike, he spotted 2 Japanese Val dive bombers skimming low across the ocean. With adrenaline surging, he dove his Hellcat to intercept. His guns roared, tracers streaking across the waves. The first Val's cockpit exploded, its pilot slumping forward as the aircraft plunged into the sea. In seconds, McPherson had claimed his first kill. The second bomber fled toward the very airfield they had just attacked. Against his leader's orders, McPherson gave chase. Shore batteries erupted in fury, filling the air with flak, but he pressed on. At point-blank range, he squeezed the trigger. The Val burst into flames, crashing near the coastline. It was reckless, dangerous, and unforgettable. 2 kills in one mission, McPherson had joined the ranks of combat aces in the making. Meanwhile, his squadron mates were engaged with other attackers. 2 more Vals were destroyed, and another enemy aircraft, a twin-engine reconnaissance plane, fell in flames. By the end of the day, every pilot in McPherson's division had scored a kill. The squadron had transformed from rookies to seasoned hunters almost overnight. The experience was electrifying. For McPherson, the fear of being a target shifted to the thrill of being the hunter. The Hellcat's firepower and ruggedness gave him the confidence to push harder, to take risks that earlier seemed unthinkable. Yet, the danger was far from over. Kamikaze waves continued to hammer the fleet, and every mission carried new peril. Still, McPherson's logbook now carried more than near misses. It carried victories. The boy who had almost been a casualty days earlier was now a proven fighter, his Hellcat baptized in fire and blood. By the war's end, the Hellcat's reputation was carved in stone. It destroyed more than 5,000 enemy aircraft, accounting for nearly 75% of the U.S. Navy's aerial victories in the Pacific. Its kill-to-loss ratio stood at an astonishing 19-1. No other American fighter achieved such dominance. The secret was not glamour, but reliability. The Hellcat was forgiving to fly, resilient in combat, and versatile in role. It could dogfight Zeros, strafe supply lines, or deliver rockets against hardened positions. Pilots, many of them barely out of training, praised its ability to take damage and keep flying. Stories abounded of Hellcats limping home with bullet-riddled wings, shredded fuselages, or oil-slick engines, yet somehow surviving. For Japan, the Hellcat became a symbol of futility. Once, the Zero had ruled the skies. By 1944, the tables had turned completely. Hellcats swarmed above carriers and beaches, cutting down kamikazes before they could strike. Japan's dwindling pool of trained pilots found themselves outmatched, outgunned, and overwhelmed. The empire could not replace its losses fast enough. Don McPherson's victories were a microcosm of the Hellcat's broader story. Young men, thrust into the fire, found themselves backed by a machine built for survival and victory. The Hellcat gave them confidence, strength, and the ability to endure. Today, historians look back on the F6F not as the fastest or flashiest fighter, but as the war winner. Its ruggedness and effectiveness made it the weapon that tipped the balance in the Pacific. Against overwhelming odds, it proved that preparation, engineering, and courage could triumph. Japan simply could not stop the Hellcat. As the invasion of Okinawa dragged on, the Japanese unleashed their most desperate weapon, the kamikaze. To the American fleet, it was a nightmare. Pilots, often barely trained, strapped themselves into aircraft packed with explosives and dove headlong into U.S. ships. It was the embodiment of Japan's resolve to fight to the last man. For the men aboard carriers and battleships, the sight of incoming kamikazes was terrifying. A single plane could cripple or sink a ship. This was where the Hellcats became the saviors of the fleet. Day and night, squadrons orbited above the task force, intercepting attackers before they reached the ships. The radio would crackle with warnings, bogey inbound, and within moments Hellcats would peel off in pairs, diving to meet the threat. Often, the kamikazes came in waves, dozens at a time, each one intent on finding a target. The Hellcats had to be relentless. Pilots described the tension as unending. There was no rest, no safety. Crews practically lived in their cockpits, flying multiple sorties every day to protect the thousands of men below. Each interception was a race. If the Hellcat failed, the kamikaze would find its mark. Ships like the Franklin, Bunker Hill, and Enterprise bore the scars of those that got through. Yet for every plane that struck, dozens more were cut down by the vigilant Hellcats. Don McPherson's squadron was no exception. Their logbooks from April 1945 read like a constant battle. patrol after patrol, interception after interception. Sometimes the fights were brief, a quick burst of gunfire ending in a splash of wreckage. Other times it was chaos, with flak burst tracers and desperate maneuvers filling the sky. But through it all, the Hellcat proved itself again and again. Historians often call Okinawa the most brutal battle of the Pacific. The kamikaze campaign cost America ships and lives, but without the Hellcats, the losses would have been catastrophic. They were the shield in the sky, absorbing the relentless fury of Japan's final gamble. Every kamikaze destroyed before reaching its target was another ship saved, another crew spared. In those desperate months, the Hellcat was more than a fighter, it was survival itself. The story of the F6F Hellcat is not just about metal, engines, and firepower. It's about the men who flew them, the missions they endured, and the victories they secured. From Don McPherson's first kills to the relentless defense against kamikazes, the Hellcat became more than a fighter. It was a guardian, a war winner, and a symbol of American resolve. Japan had no answer for its power, and history remembers it as the machine that dominated the Pacific skies. Tough, relentless, unstoppable, the Hellcat truly was the fighter Japan couldn't stop.